Hello everyone and welcome to another video. This video I just wanted to talk about why the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan to end World War II rather than invading the mainland. Now this isn't a new topic, but recently I was scrolling through Tumblr like I sometimes do, and I ran across a post by an individual who goes by the moniker of Marxist Barbie. And if that doesn't tell you what you need to know about them, then I don't know what does. Definitely a not biased source, right? So in this post, it started off with them saying, erase the memory of America dropping the bombs for any kind of humanitarian reason.
Alright, so right here I have their original post, and I'll go ahead and read it now.
Erase the idea that it was anything more than a political move to scare Russia, and also satiate U.S. curiosity as to the true ability of nuclear weapons. Nagasaki and Hiroshima were not military bases. They were heavily populated civilian cities chosen precisely BC the U.S. wanted to see how many people an atomic bomb could kill in one go. Japan was on the verge of surrendering. The U.S. literally wanted to test out their nuclear weapons on people they deemed disposable. That is it. If those bombs were dropped by any other nation than the United States, everyone involved would have been tried as war criminals.
Satiate the true idea of nuclear capabilities of the United States? They had already tested the nuclear bomb at this point. Not only that, but the USSR and Russia combined tested over 2,000 nuclear warheads around the planet over the course of 50 years. Both the United States and Russia are guilty of this. Russia tested nukes all over Siberia. The United States tested nukes in the ocean and in the West, and Russia also conducted similar atmospheric and underwater tests. Every major power who acquired nukes is guilty of this satiation, as you call it. So in regards to their comment about how if any other nation would have dropped a bomb like this and anyone else, there would have been war crimes, I'd like to point out the contextual differences between countries like Nazi Germany, the Empire of Japan, and the Axis powers, because those are the only people that had to deal with war crimes. And for good reason, I'd like to say. So let's compare the rape of Nanking to the dropping of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the rape of Nanking involved a justification for a Japanese war on China and taking their land, and essentially the Japanese army essentially felt that they could rape and pillage an entire city. Yet at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the Japanese would spread lies to the natives so that the Americans would do that. After calculating that this would save more lives all around and end the war more quickly, dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, waited a few days for the Japanese high command to surrender, and after hearing nothing, dropped the second bomb, only to receive a very quick, "We surrender, guys. We're done." The person who made this post, Marxist Barbie, makes the claim that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were civilian targets that had no military importance. Of course, this was a lie, and someone in the post actually questioned them to cite their sources, and of course, in typical deceptive fashion, they said, "Oh, I figured people could look this up themselves." Yeah, bullshit, asshole. Anyway, Hiroshima was actually headquarters to the Japanese Second Army, and Nagasaki was a huge port city that shipped military supplies to and from Japan to the remaining holdings all around the Japanese Empire. So these were 2 strategically important cities. Additionally, Marxist Barbie makes the claim in their post that many American generals, in fact, did not want to bomb the cities, and they thought it was being overly barbaric and inhumane. However, they only cited 3 generals, one of which, Douglas MacArthur, would later talk about during the Korean War, wanting to steamroll into China and nuke China to end that war. So, not a great person to quote if you're going to talk about generals who didn't support using the nuke. But I digress. I'd like to first point out that up until the end of the war, the Japanese had defended each of their territories with a fanaticism that the Americans had not seen really prior to this war at all, and it was getting worse as they got closer to Japan. They would typically defend to the last man. They would tell the native populations that the American soldiers would rape and murder all of them, and as a tragic result of this lie, many civilians would fling themselves off of cliffs and kill themselves. So the Japanese were not afraid to fanaticize not only their troops, but the populations where they occupied. And on mainland Japan, where the people had been part of the Japanese Empire for the last 15-ish years, and had kind of bought into this fanaticism, it was projected that they would be armed and defend to the last man, and that casualties based off of previous battles would be upwards in the millions for the Americans and possibly even higher for the Japanese people. Now, Marxist Barbie also makes the point that a blockade simply would have solved the issue. However, this is not the case. One specific instance that comes to my mind is a Japanese sniper who held out for 30 to 40 years after the war had ended. And when he came out, he asked, "Did we win? Did we lose?" But that was the extent to which these people were committed to their cause. They were willing to fight until the bitter end. And while there were some discrepancies in the Japanese higher-ups, the military faction of Japan, the military faction of the ruling class in Japan rather, would not have given up if there was a blockade. They would have found a way to keep the empire going. The Allies would have had to do something at some point. So, yes, America decided to use the nuclear bombs, which, although it was a tragic loss of life, ultimately there were less lives lost as a result of using the nukes than if the Americans would have invaded. And additionally, it brought a swift end to the war, which war is terrible, and it's better to end it more quickly than having to wait and build up forces and lose more people than you would have if you would have used the nukes. So this is ultimately why the United States used nuclear weapons at the end of the Second War. Now, this imperialist kind of perspective on America comes from a very specific faction of people that would like to see the crumbling of American stability, generally. But they're being delusional and incorrect. Now, there is a point to make with this nuclear bomb usage at the end of the war, where the Americans didn't want a similar situation they had in Germany that they had in Japan. Russia had invaded Manchuria near the end of the war and taken it back from the Japanese. And it's not implausible that the Soviets could have invaded South Korea and possibly Japan itself and caused a similar predicament with the Americans. Now, while that is a point, that is not the main reason as to why they were used. It was a supplementary reason. So essentially, this is why the United States ended up using the 2 nuclear warheads at the end of World War II, and it is what resulted in the war ending in August rather than ending in possibly December or January of the following year. A mainland invasion of Japan would have been incredibly costly to everybody, and there would have been further destruction. So generally, the decision that was made was probably for the best. I'd like to gently remind people that using 2 nukes in the context of trying to end a war more quickly to save more lives is completely different from starving your own people, or raping an entire city like the Japanese did, or for the Chinese Communist Party killing 50 million of their own people for a cultural revolution. So that's all I gotta say. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and comment below. Ciao.